Create. The HP Pavilion 7970 with the Intel Pentium 4 processor. How will you use it? Save up to $250 by mail on the HP Digital Photography Studio.
If you are seeking someone you believe to be missing from the attack on the World Trade Center or the Pentagon, log on to cnn.com/missing to submit a photograph and description. Please include your contact information.
As the story continues to unfold, join Aaron Brown every weeknight at 10 for the latest developments and in-depth coverage of America's new war. A CNN special report with Aaron Brown every weeknight at 10 Eastern on CNN.
Welcome to this special Crossfire Town Meeting live from the campus of the George Washington University in downtown Washington, D.C. Tonight, Americans all, we suffer and struggle together. Never in our history have we experienced anything so tragic or so troubling. And in these terrible days following last week's attacks on the United States, every American has something to say, and every American has lots of questions. So all this week, we're going to be here at GW with a live audience and a panel of experts to discuss and debate how America should respond to terrorism. How could it happen here? Are we now safe? Are we in fact at war? If so, against whom? And what does it mean for us?
And here to help us understand the last week and the days ahead, James Woolsey, who's the former CIA director, Senator George Allen of Virginia, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, James Lee Witt, former director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and Robin Wright, reporter for the Los Angeles Times, who's also written a number of books on terrorism in the Middle East.
And of course, we want to welcome the great students from the great campus of GW University. Thank you. Senator Allen, I want to ask you the question I think that every American wants to know. We are the greatest nation on earth. We are the most powerful nation on earth. We have the biggest military with the biggest weapons, and yet 19 men were able to penetrate this country, take over 4 airplanes, destroy some of our major institutions, kill maybe 5,000 Americans, and bring this country to a halt. How could that ever happen without our not knowing anything about it?
Well, it did. I think that our intelligence agencies, international, had some ideas that and had threats, knew about it. I think some of these ideas and threats were known. They weren't acted on. I don't think anybody even imagined, though, something like this happening. There have been threats over many, many years. Clearly, we've been violated. We're not impervious to these attacks. We thought suicide bombings were something that happened maybe in Israel or happened in Europe, but it's happened here, and no one had ever contemplated such a vicious, callous, heartless attack on innocent, unarmed people. And so we've learned from it. I don't blame our intelligence agencies or our law enforcement agencies. They all do the best job they can. We need to learn from it, learn how we can prevent this from occurring again. Insofar as airlines are concerned, we need to make sure that no airplane ever gets taken over again and used as a missile. Our pilots need to be made more safe in the cockpit. It needs to be like a vault. No one can get in. We ought to use technology where there's a button where if there's an attack or something amiss, that gives a signal to FAA and they just automatically fly that plane and land it. And there are things we need to learn from it, but I think there's a great unity, a great coalescing, and a resolve to make this country safer, but also stick to our principles and our liberties, and also seek justice. And the justice needs to be sure, and it needs to be very swift and severe.
Now, Mr. Woolsey, if, as the Senator said, we're going to learn from this, we have to know how it happened. Now, 2 of the suspected terrorists, the hijackers, apparently were on a list of suspected terrorists, and yet they moved freely around the country on valid visas, apparently. They bought tickets in their own names for these flights. Specifically, where did the chain of intelligence and law enforcement break here?
It's hard to say on different things that happened in different ways. Some of these people got into the country on visas. The State Department people who process visas are few in number and overworked. People do get in. The blind Sheikh Omar, got into the United States on a visa when he shouldn't have some years ago, who was involved in the bombings in New York in the early 90s. The CIA picked up something about 2 of these men meeting with someone related to bin Laden, and that information went through the system, but is winding its way through the law enforcement system. It never got to the right people at the right time. The CIA was operating under some constraints overseas that I think were unwisely imposed in 1995 by the Clinton administration, and I hope some of those are going to get fixed. The FBI's guidelines are confusing and vague. We said last year on a terrorism commission I was on, those need to have been scrubbed and changed, and they were not. Airport security was lax. The fighter aircraft that were to defend the country itself, there were only 20 of them on alert in the whole country, and none was really close to Washington or New York. There are a lot of things that different parts of the government were not looking at and not doing that if anyone had foreseen this certainly would have been done differently.
Robin Wright, you've written one of the best books on terrorism, Sacred Rage. You were in Afghanistan last year. You know sort of inside the terrorist mind. These 19 men were not alone. There must be others in this country. They're not finished with their war against the United States yet. What could we expect next? Where do they go next?
Well, one of the things that's most difficult in this war of terrorism that we've launched is the fact that they're not just in the United States, but they're in 35 countries, including several that are allies of the United States. So it's a war that unlike anything we've waged in the past, really has no front line. It's a war fighting in the shadows, wondering about the people next to us. Yes, they probably do have operatives and sympathizers still in this country. They are the product of 2 different phenomena. One is the emergence of this hatred of the United States for its involvement in its policies in the Middle East. But at a broader level, they've emerged because most of the Muslim world, the largest bloc being in the Arab world, is also the last bloc of countries to hold out against democracy. And in the frustration over the last 25 years as the rest of the world has moved toward democracy and freedoms, these countries haven't. And as a result, people have turned, because all opposition is exiled or imprisoned or banned, to Islam because it's the only alternative. And so you have the emergence of a political movement that then moves into a political extreme.
That's the background. I agree with you. But what could we expect next as Americans? What should we be on our guard against? More planes used as suicide bombings? Or where do you think they go next in this war?
Having covered terrorism for 20 years in Beirut and other places, it's quite clear that they have, in every juncture, outsmarted us. And if you're trying to figure out what are the options out there, there are obviously concerns that everyone's expressed for the last decade, the U.S. intelligence community, and chemical and biological weapons. Those are things. But I would be very surprised to see the use of aviation again. The lockdown we will have on pilots, airports, will make it very difficult for them to act, and they'll look for alternatives.
But, Mr. Witt, let's suppose that they did act. Let's, for the sake of argument, let's say that the terrorists did somehow introduce a biological or chemical agent into a city, anthrax, something horrible like that. You were head of FEMA for many years, obviously an agency that responds to disasters like that. Were they to occur, how ready is the United States for a biological or chemical attack?
Well, Tucker, I think they're as ready as they can be as far as planning and implementing the plan. But the problem that we face here in the United States is that you have the first responders, the firefighters, the police officers at the local level who are the frontline defense in an event like this. And Congress last year gave FEMA $100 million to provide grants to local fire departments to bring them up to a little bit higher level. But you know what the request was, the need was? $3 billion. So there's got to be some funding and there's got to be some equipping of these first responders that's on the front line.
And yet you say that if there were a biological or chemical attack tomorrow, you think the United States is fairly well prepared to deal with it?
We have the plan and we have exercised the plan, but we're still not equipped to respond to that type of event.
I want to remind our panelists to signal to us anytime you want to add something that any one of the other panelists has to say. But I want to come to you, Jim Woolsey. Are we at war? Is this a war that we have launched? And if so, yes or no, and against whom?
It was launched against us, and yes, I think we have effectively, Congress is not in so many words, but effectively declared that we are at war. But unlike the morning of December 7th, 1941, when you could look at the red suns on the wings of the Japanese aircraft and tell who you were at war with, now you really can't. There's strong indications that Osama bin Laden's organization was involved with this. Perhaps other terrorist groups in his ambit are affiliated. I retain some suspicions that there may have been some state intelligence services involved. Certainly Afghanistan, not having an intelligence service, but Afghanistan's giving aid to bin Laden by letting him stay there. But one, I think, wants to at least look at the possibility that states such as Iraq over the years may have been involved in some of these acts against us. But the government, the U.S. government really doesn't know yet, and one of the first things to do is to go back over earlier terrorist incidents, look at everything carefully with a fine-tooth comb, and see how we can get it sorted out. There may be more involved here than just a single terrorist group.
Well, I think most indications are that there's more than just one. The aid and comfort, the financing, the harboring, the assistance is more than just one country. And I am confident as this is all being recreated, even the evidence that we've seen that has been declassified, that's been on CNN, where you know all this information about these 19 individuals, it's all getting tracked back to a variety of places. But that's where this war is going to have to be fought. It's going to need to be fought, obviously, against the heads of these terrorist organizations. They need to be knocked out. But also punished are those who finance and support and harbor them. And some of the leaders of these countries are in a pretty tough position because there are a lot of people in those countries, as Robin was saying, who actually don't like the concepts of freedom and liberty and freedom of expression and beliefs that we have in this country. And for countries such as Egypt, Pakistan, for example, the leaders can be very moderate, same with the king in Jordan, but there are a lot of folks who don't share those views. Look what happened to President Sadat for being relatively moderate insofar as Israel is
Well, what does that mean,
concerned.
Senator, that we're going to declare war on Egypt? Or, I mean,
No.
the Philippines apparently has one of a bin Laden offshoot in
but
it.
that doesn't mean that the Philippine government or the Egyptian government or the Pakistani government or the Jordanian government, any of them, are actually financing them or supporting them. Now, for those governments that are actually somehow helping them out with law enforcement, with intelligence, with communications, I think we're going to have to crack down on those who are hiding the funds that are getting around, because this was a very effective, I hate to say anything positive about it, but it was well orchestrated, well organized, and obviously planned for many, many years. This wasn't a spontaneous gang huddling together and say, hey, let's do this. This was done for years, including getting them trained here in this country.
I see both of you want to say something. Robin, go first.
No, I was just going to say 2 points on Jim's accusation about the Iraqis. This operation was far more sophisticated than anything bin Laden and his lieutenants have ever carried out before, in terms of having people who are well-educated, trained, and penetrating the United States and trained there. At the same time, Saddam Hussein has a dread fear of Islamic extremism himself, and the differences between Afghanistan and Iraq, the logistics of coordination are awfully difficult.
It's possible,
but Jamie.
Yeah, I think it's very important for people to understand that FEMA's responsibility and the FBI's responsibility and crisis management and consequence management, and the FBI has a lead responsibility to the response of an event. But the key is for the CIA and the FBI to have the capability to prevent it from ever happening in the first place. But if it does happen, like this event, then we need to make sure that the people on the ground have the capability to respond to meet that threat and be able to take care of people. If you have a biological, chemical type event, then it may be 3 or 4 days before you know what it is.
Right.
And it may be spread everywhere. So it's important to do the prevention up front before it ever happens. And that's what is important that the Senator and Robin is talking about.
Can I ask Robin a question from her?
I'll tell you what, we're going to take a break. Save your question.
Certainly will.
We got lots more questions coming
We'll be
up.
back in just a minute. We'll take our questions to the audience, our student panel here, the audience at George Washington University Be right back with our Crossfire special town meeting.